Fans will have high expectations for any movie set in the galaxy far, far away, and Solo, a Star Wars story, is no exception. In cinemas this week, Solo introduces us to a young version of Han Solo, played by Alden Ehrenreich rather than Harrison Ford, and tells the story of how he came to be a galactic smuggler and captain of the Millennium Falcon. The film covers some major Star Wars plot points we already knew about, as well as introducing a host of new characters and a lot of unexpected twists, including that final cameo. Wired's Victoria Turk and Matt Burgess sat down after the film to debrief. Warning, contains minor spoilers. Victoria Turk: So Matt, first impressions, what did you make of the film? Matt Burgess: There's always a certain level of hope I have when walking into any new movie in the Star Wars franchise, a hope that it's not going to be terrible. Solo certainly isn't the worst of the films in the canon, but it's definitely not the best either. Director Ron Howard certainly managed to cram a lot in, maybe too much. There's action from start to finish. I found a few of the fight scenes went on a little bit too long, but there were some moments between the characters that gave it a fresh feeling. It's hard to go into the show without the worry of how Alden Ehrenreich is going to do his Han. The best films of 2018 so far, and the ones worth waiting for. VT: I agree, I enjoyed the movie as a fun romp through some of the Star Wars universe, but I came away feeling it was all a bit forgettable. You're right about cramming a lot in. I was nervous at the start where we seemed to go from cliché to cliché with young Han's origin story, but I got into it once he'd found his crew. There were a lot of key moments covered: Han meeting Chewie, finding the Millennium Falcon, the Kessel Run. I do think it might have been more successful if the film had just focused on one or two of these major events, rather than constantly trying to top itself with another big scene. Was your verdict on Ehrenreich as Han? MB: There's actually too much Han in this movie. I feel we come away knowing everything about him. It's like the full version of his Harrison Ford character is formed from this film. The way he gets the Millennium Falcon from Lando is a bit cheap. I would have been fine if it didn't happen at all this time round. But I thought Ehrenreich did a solid job. During the first half I spent a lot of time comparing him to Ford, but by the end this had largely gone away. Ehrenreich is pretty believable, and once you get over the fact there are going to be some differences and embrace them, it's much more enjoyable. Did you think any other performances stood out? VT: I thought Donald Glover as Lando was great. The other human characters were largely bland, though Paul Bettany played a good villain as Dryden. To be honest, my favorite character was Lando's droid buddy L3. Her battle for equal rights for droids was a great little subplot, and I think it could have been done more justice. She's clearly meant as a kind of feminist character, and it didn't sit well with me when they initially played her attempts at droid liberation for laughs. It felt almost like they were trying hard to have a woke storyline but didn't quite have the guts to commit. That subplot developed potential became quite poignant later on, however. Shame it was brought to a bit of an abrupt end. Oh, and Chewbacca was obviously a highlight. MB: We definitely should have had more of L3. A lot of characters that seemed important died and nobody really mourned them. They just carried on with the movie like nothing had happened. Chewie less than 3. Him being reunited with the Wookiees was one of my favorite moments. Disney should definitely make a standalone Wookiee movie. We do need to mention all those plot twists at the end though. the best alternative summer festivals in the UK and Europe. VT, I also felt nothing when some supposedly important characters died. I guess that's the problem when you're setting the action in the past. We know Solo and Chewie at least have to survive, so it's hard to feel much urgency when they're supposedly in peril. And that unfortunately means the odds are stacked for their entourage. And yes, those twists. Sigh. Without giving too much away, at the end it all just gets a bit silly, doesn't it? Plus there's that surprise cameo. MB, there's just a little too much going on. Death, heartbreak, betrayal, the dark side. Nobody needs this much action in the final 20 minutes. I think it's partly why the movie loses some of its memorability. There are a lot of big moments, but you just don't connect with them as there is this rush to move on to the next one. And in the end, it tries to set up what is coming next in one scene. It should have been a bit more of a gradual climax. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed it, but there is a lot happening. Do you think the whole thing was worth Disney doing? VT, I mean sure, I think a lot of people will see it and enjoy it, but it's not going to be a standout in the franchise. Maybe the lack of Jedi good versus evil meant it was missing something? We never get a sense of that real galaxy hanging in the balance. Jeopardy, everyone's just out to make a quick buck or save their own skin. Until the end, when the film tries to shoehorn some greater import onto Han and Kira's actions. I want to know more about the rebels we meet at the end, but by that time I just couldn't really take much more in. MB, ultimately, for me, it was fun. There were some interesting plot points that were introduced and some of the characters were likable. Ehrenreich did well, but he was no Glover. Disney clearly had a lot of problems with this film. There were a lot of production issues and senior staff getting fired, and I think they've had an impact. It tries a little bit too hard to be familiar and in doing so ignores some of the characters and plot points that add freshness to the Star Wars lineup. We're going to see more of Ehrenreich as Han, I'm sure, and when we do I think it'll be stronger for getting rid of his biggest hits early on. VT, fingers crossed we get a Wookiee movie first.